Marcus Whitman, a missionary, saw the Oregon Trail as a usable wagon route to the Northwest lands. Marcus Whitman led the Great Migration of 1843 with its hundreds of covered wagons across Idaho and into Oregon. Long trains of immigrants crossed southeastern Idaho on the California Trail. Idaho was not begun to be settled until the wave of unhappy immigrants began to turn back. Idaho's attractions were enough to lure people from both coasts, the South, the East, and the Midwest. Idaho became the first state to be settled from the West and the East and overwhelmingly American by birth. In 1860-1861, the discovery of gold in Idaho brought fortune hunters to the Idaho area of the Washington Territory. In 1863, under President Lincoln, the original Idaho Territory was established. It was the largest land area ever officially established and named by the United States government. The Idaho Territory was larger than the state of Texas. The Idaho Territory covered what is now Idaho, Montana, most of Wyoming, and portions of western North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska. The first farming and livestock operations in Idaho began in the valleys near the mining districts. Some raised vegetables, oats and wheat, others cutting the hay along the river bottoms for feed. In 1876, the first drove of cattle went east. Next came the railroads. Beginning in 1883, the building of the railroads brought more settlers to the area and the possibility of shipping products to the Midwest and eastern states. 1890, Idaho is granted statehood. Less than 50 years from the time of the Great Migration of wagon trains passing through on their way to Oregon, Idaho had become a state of the Union with abundant resources already being developed and towns and cities established, including the settlement later to be known as Fruitland, Idaho. The first Idaho state legislative session was held December 8, 1890. At that time there was no Payette County nor Canyon County. Our area was part of Ada County for 26 years prior to Canyon County being established, and for another 27 years was part of Canyon County. The Carey Act in 1892 gave each of the states 1 million acres if the state would undertake irrigation of the land, and another 1,000,000 acres in 1908. Liberty School was one of the districts consolidated with Fruitland District Number 18 prior to the formation of the Canyon County School Districts on July 14, 1893. It was located near the present Gateway Corner in what was known as the Liberty Tract. December of 1883, the public was notified they could take the train at Payette for the East every day at 6:30 a.m. In 1890, the first fruit was shipped from the Payette area. The fruit was shipped in rail cars made with thick walls, stuffed with sawdust. They would put the baskets of fruit inside with blocks of ice, and that's the way they shipped the fruit to keep it cool. The first railroad station in Fruitland burned. In 1905, H.B. Orcutt of Armour Ice House in Washoe reported the ice had been harvested and 3,000 tons of ice were stored in the building. The fruit men were then assured of cold storage for the coming season. When the first railroad station in Fruitland burned and the new one was constructed, it was built with an apartment above the train station for the family to live in. It was said to have been very nicely furnished.
Because you see, Washoe was a big
Well, that's kind of
center,
where Boomerang
center
was,
place.
you know,
Yeah,
to start with.
and when they decided to build a railroad through, why, they cut all of the lumber up above and floated down the Payette River and had a log jam right at Washoe and a big sawmill to cut the ties for the railroad. They cut all of the ties for the railroad between Twin Falls and Portland, right there.
Kenneth Stegner, a cousin of E.A. Stegner, had a tent on the Stegner property where he developed and printed his own photographs. He kept a journal for most of 1906 and talked about working on the sugar beet dump and commented that it was the hardest work he had ever done. When the village of Fruitland was being established, land was given to the Brethrens and the Methodists on which to build the church buildings. Many of the early settlers came west at the urging of their congregation to act as missionaries to the west. Upon returning from his Civil War experiences, Joseph Shawn and wife Mary Jackson Shawn lived in Iowa, where he briefly worked as a schoolteacher until becoming a well-known farmer and merchant of farm implements. In 1880, Joseph and Mary moved their family to Kansas, and then in 95 to the Washoe Bench area of the Payette Valley. He became a leader in horticulture, specifically in the advancement of fruit culture, with emphasis on the production of pears. He was one of the first agents for the Studebaker Company in the area, selling its buggies. Joseph Henry Shawn died April 26, 1911 in Payette at the age of 72. His death occurred accidentally as he and his wife were returning from a visit to his orchards on the outskirts of town. His horse became spooked by something in the road and started to run, throwing the occupants of the carriage out of the road. Joseph hit on his head and was killed instantly. Mary received a broken wrist. On June 3, 1911, Mary was awarded a pension of $12 a month as a widow of Joseph Henry Shawn, former captain of Company K, 9th Regiment, Iowa Cavalry. Frederick and Rosa Schmidt were married 1889 in Montana, moved to Idaho in 1893, and homesteaded 2 pieces of land. Fred died September 1897 after being thrown from a horse. Rosa raised the 4 children and farmed, including about 20 acres of prunes. Grant and Lily Fisher of Missouri came to Idaho prior to 1904. With them came their 4 children. A daughter, Merle, was born after coming to Idaho. Levi Zane Schubert and wife Alice left Wyandotte County, Ohio in 1900 for Idaho. They had 1 daughter, Ylva, and 4 sons, all born in Ohio. Levi and Alice homesteaded a piece of land on the Washoe Bench. He set out an orchard. He also owned a farm northeast of Fruitland. In 1917, their son Leander Ray purchased the farm northeast of Fruitland from his parents. June 5, 1917, Ray Schubert registered for the draft. He served in World War I. The story goes that Ray got out of the service on the East Coast, purchased a motorcycle, and rode it across the United States to Fruitland, where the parents lived, and to the land he had purchased before going to the service. Ray married Helen Peters of Payette in 1923. Ray had a 22-foot ladder on large wheels with long handles. He would move the ladder from tree to tree so to get the cherries in the tops of the trees. From the top of the ladder you would climb the tree up to the cherries. From the top of those trees one could see the smokestack on the sugar beet factory in Nessa, Oregon, about 20 miles away. Ray had his own packing house at the back of the farm on the bank overlooking the Payette River. Lonzo Zane Schubert, another son of Levi and Alice, and his wife Effie managed the telephone office in Fruitland in the 1920s. Nephews Cecil and Lyle Schubert were both born at the telephone office, with Effie assisting the births. Ylva, daughter of Levi and Alice Schubert, married Thurston H. Beckwith. Thurston Beckwith came with his parents T.J. and Mary Beckwith and 2 brothers, Harry and Jesse, from North Dakota in 1899 and homesteaded on the Washoe Bench. Prior to North Dakota, they had lived in Michigan. T.J. and Beckwith packed out their own fruit on the place in Washoe. Thurston Beckwith owned the Beckwith Packing Company in Fruitland. He was the first mayor of Fruitland. Grower Supply now occupies the building that was the packing shed. Thurston Beckwith's sons worked at the shed. Carl and Glenn worked on the unloading dock, unloading the produce that the farmers would bring in. Emery was the shed foreman. Webster Lewis and wife Martha, both born in Pennsylvania, and son Harry and his wife Maud Lewis and 2-year-old son Clark, all born in Iowa, came to Idaho. They purchased 80 acres of land 1 mile east of what is now known as Gateway Junction. In addition to the orchards, raising white Plymouth Rock and white Leghorn hens was also a part of their farm operation. In 1912, Harry Lewis was elected to the Idaho State House of Representatives. Harry was principal organizer of the Idaho National Guard. Harry Lewis was a charter member of the Fruit Association and served continuously on the board until his death in 1951. Noah Webster Lewis's 40 acres were sold to Fred Engel. Fred Engel later sold the 40 acres to Burton Cheney, now the Mesa Verde subdivision. Harry and Maud had 2 daughters, Dorothy and Marion, and 2 sons, Glenn and Clark. In 1943, Dorothy's husband, Robert Groves of Fresno, California, joined the fruit enterprise known as Lewis and Groves. Robert had raised peaches and raisin grapes in California.
So he went up to Cabart, which is up there south of Cascade, and cut enough holes to build storage. That storage must have been 120 or 30 feet long. Then the poles in the back end were put there to hold the poles across the top of it. Then he cut poles to start to the center to go to the inside of the storage out to the rafters on the outside. Had all those poles. Then I can't remember whether there was 1 or 2 carloads of poles that he loaded on up there at Cascade and shipped them down to Fruitland. Then they hauled them from Fruitland to I don't know whether it's from Fruitland or from the railroad track along or someplace. Out home there, he built his storage. He had the uprights, I think it's about 8, 9, 10 feet high.
Yeah, at least 10 feet.
That's what I was thinking, around 10 feet. And then rafters from there up to, I think he had up to the center poles. Not the center, but 20 feet, 25 feet. Then they hit on another set of poles up there. And then they got all this all put together. They put woven wire over it and put straw on top of that. And started piling dirt on it. The dirt must have been, at least 12, 14 inches deep when he ended up. And it seemed to me like it was 2 or 3 years later that fires got it. So they got the pole and built Clarence a small house.
After he got the storage.
he started to haul the apples in boxes into the storage, store them in there, baskets, boxes and end baskets.
Really? Huh.
He'd store them in there along the winter time, sometime when you got time to do it, kind of time to sell them. Then he had it pretty well sealed off to where it was warm in there. It wasn't warm, but it was kept them from freezing.
Right. Huh.
Henry Blaine Strawn, also known as H.B., was born September 28, 1877, in New Cumberland, Ohio. In 1881, his family moved to Iowa, settling in Clark County, where his father bought 220 acres. He married Nettie Linda Slinker February 28, 1899, in Taro, Clark County, Iowa. He and Nettie farmed 80 acres for 9 years. On the 9th year, it rained so much that the corn planter stood in the fields for 1 month, and then a late frost froze all the fruit. So they sold everything, and they bundled up the children and got on a train and headed west. October 3rd, 1908, they arrived in Payette, Idaho, where they were met by Levi Slinker, Nettie's father. They rented a home in Payette, and H.B. worked at the apple dryer for a year. February 4th, 1909, they bought a home place south of Fruitland. The following spring, all the fruit froze, and the only fruit that they had was gooseberries, of which Nettie canned 80 quarts. The land had been cultivated for only 1 year. He built outbuildings for shelter of grain and stock and continued to improve the work on his farm as needed and planted the orchard. His fruit crop in 1919 netted him $10,000. He was one of the few horticulturists who always had a market arranged in advance in the East. H.B. Strawn had a regular buyer in Kansas and knew there would always be a sale for his product. He had 23 acres planted to prunes and apples, making a specialty of raising Winesaps, Jonathan, and Rome Beauty apples. In 1944, H.B. and Nettie sold their farm to their oldest son, Clarence, and the farm was later sold to Clarence's oldest son, Richard. It has been in the family for over 100 years as of 2010. They celebrated their 50th anniversary in 1949. Henry Blaine and Nettie Slinker Strawn were married 54 years. While they were busy about the orchard and farming, they raised a wonderful family, teaching them the value of community involvement.
The first bridge over the Snake River between Fruitland and Ontario was a one-way wagon bridge. This was the second bridge built over the Snake River between Fruitland and Ontario. It was built in 1923 and replaced the one-way wagon bridge. Eugene A. Stegner sold his property in Minnesota and moved to the Fruitland area in 1902. He purchased the 60-acre farm from Mrs. T.R. Hubbard that had been the Keystone Nursery. He farmed this place for 5 years, sold the property, and established a mercantile business at Fruitland, the first building placed on the town site. The first store building was built on property diagonally across the intersection from the current Brethren Church, facing Highway 30, now Pennsylvania Avenue. Their home was built on the same property and is still there today. In late 1908 or early 1909, a new store building was built in downtown Fruitland, where the Fruitland School District office is now. After building the new store, he moved the first store downtown beside the new building cut a door linking the two buildings together. It was here that he also had a shoe repair shop, sold gasoline, and various other items. The new store building had an upstairs with outside stairs and entrance where meetings were held. There were times when a movie projector was set up across the street and movies were shown on the side of the E.A. Stegner store. Eugene A. Stegner served as the first postmaster of the village, appointed in 1911. Eugene Stegner and Russell Hooker would go to Ontario or sometimes New Plymouth to get freight off of the train for the Stegner store.
We didn't have pavement down the Fruitland streets, and to really get the gravel going, they had, and I think it was Les Hooker, again, that had and this was quite a few horses and quite a few wagons, and they would go down the main street of Fruitland side by side, and two men would be at the back and one driving the horse, and they'd lift up a board and shovel the gravel underneath as the team slowly moved along. And that's the way they graveled our streets here at Fruitland.
This is a picture of Russell Hooker hauling gasoline with his horse and wagon. This is the first school built in Fruitland. It was built where the city park and the post office now stand. Notice the wagons that were the buses to haul the children. This lady taught for many, many years at Fruitland. Her first students knew her as Miss Jinks. After she married, she was Mrs. Downing.
All right, now we will go to, let's see, it would be where the apple bin is, and you turn like towards the school before you get to the apple bin. And I should have gone down and looked at the name of those streets, but I don't remember. Iowa, is that one? But there was the First Baptist Church, and it was standing quite a while after we moved to Fruitland. And it was a beautiful church, and it's just a shame it was taken down, because it I think today would even be in good condition. But they had all the weddings and all the school graduations there at the time. And I can even remember that it was slanted from the back down to the pulpit, and then the pulpit was raised, and they would have plays there.
Pleasant View School was in the vicinity of the Buckingham Railroad siding. Before building the village in Fruitland, it was considered to build the town at Pleasant View Community. B. Frank Tussing and his wife Amanda and family of North Platte, Nebraska arrived in Fruitland in 1904 by train. Tussings had lived in Ohio prior to moving to Nebraska about 1884. Mr. Tussing had already purchased the old Whitney orchard of a variety of apples, 1/4 mile south of Fruitland. Mrs. Tussing was a Royston before her marriage to B.F. Tussing. Tussings packed and shipped their own apples primarily to Grand Island and Omaha, Nebraska. All the apples were shipped by train. Otto Dame had gotten off of the train in Fruitland with them in 1904 and had worked for Mr. Tussing. Otto rode on the train and sold the apples at their destinations. He later married Tussing's daughter Nora. He also was janitor at the Fruitland School for 10 years. In 1910, B.F. Tussing raised and sold $11,756 worth of apples from an 8-acre orchard. After deducting interest, all cost of production, rent of land, and all other charges, the net return was $7,011. Just look at the size of those trees. The ladies in this picture are packing apples into wooden boxes. Notice that the room where they are, and then this room, they're having a banquet with china and real silver and candlesticks in the same room as they were packing the apples in. William Homan and his parents immigrated to America from Germany in 1884. Before coming to America, William had been in the Army. Upon coming to America, he joined the military. He fought in the Battle of Wounded Knee. Because of his service in America, he was able to acquire land in Nebraska. William Homan heard of the land in Idaho and had wanted to be an orchardist. In 1902, he came to Idaho. He sold his holdings in Nebraska and purchased a 40-acre prune orchard southeast of Fruition. In 1903, he returned to Nebraska for his family. They loaded all of their belongings onto an immigrant train boxcar, including their Percheron stallion. William Holman rode in the boxcar. The rest of the family rode in another car. The price for the boxcar was about $100, and that included the fare for the family to ride in another rail car. Homans packed out their fruit for shipping in the packing shed on their farm. In later years, the prune trees were pulled and apple trees planted. In the 40s, during World War II, they had no money to replace dead trees. When a tree would die, they would pull it and put a volunteer Italian plum tree in its place. When they sprayed the trees, they would spray the apple trees and not the prune trees. The prune trees did not require the spray like the apple trees. Homans used a central spray rig set up in the center of the orchard to spray. It had two 600-gallon barrels to hold the water and chemicals. They had 3 4-inch pipe carrying the spray at 400 pounds of pressure throughout the orchard. 100-foot hoses were connected to the spigots on the pipe. The men would drag the hoses and spray the trees within reach. Then they would move to the next spigot and so on until the orchard spraying was completed. While the men were spraying, Hugh Homan, as a young child, had the responsibility of mixing the chemicals and keeping the barrels filled with the chemicals and water. The spray rig was powered with an electric single-cycle motor. The electricity was connected to the house power. Hugh said it worked pretty good until the cooking began at mealtime in the neighborhood and the power to the spray rig motor would drop.
We had a 300-gallon with a Model A Ford engine on it for the pump and the pressure and stuff for mixing. And we would just pull up to a ditch and lay the hose in there and pull it out of the water out of the ditch and go out and spray. And of course, when you're working out of a ditch, a lot of times we spend a lot of time, the filter wasn't working right, and we'd get plugged up. But that was my job. I pulled up to a lot of ditches and put in 300 gallons of water, and we could go for quite a ways. They were both on about 50-foot hoses. One on, we'd take 2 rows at a time and go down. And
somebody on each hose.
My 2 brothers.
N.J. Garman manufactured his own dormant spray by boiling water, lime, and sulfur together in a tank using wood as a fuel. It was applied to the trees through a rubber hose on the end of metal rods 8 and 10 feet long and held in the hands of the operator. Each limb had to be followed full length as the pressure from the pump was quite low. The power for pumping was supplied by a 1-cylinder engine or a man on a pump handle.
Yeah.
Did you thin the trees when you were a kid?
In fact, let's go back a little further. I even started holding a spray hose and spraying trees when I was 10 years old.
Really?
I had enough sense that Dad taught me that you go in underneath, spray the interior of the tree first, and then back out and spray the outside. And it's hard in those days. You fire a hired man that knew how to spray a tree and not waste spray and get it covered. And Winslow, I think was her name, here in New Plymouth. Had an orchard. They had orchards all piped with what we call a stationary sprayer. The sprayers in the barn or shed there, and had galvanized pipes running down. They had pickets of it going on. You drug a 100-foot hose, sprayed 3 rows at a time going up. And I was in high school, I think, just got in freshman when Winslow come down to hire me to go up and spray. Now, I mean, that's a killing job. You start out in the morning, you never get any rest. Like you fill a tank in the old days and you rest a little bit. You drag that damn hose with usually 90 to 100 pounds of pressure in it around, spraying those trees.
Well, so how big was your tractor?
You didn't have tractors.
How many horses did it take to pull the spray wagon?
2.
2.
It only held, I think it's 800-gallon tank.
Really?
Now, 800 gallons plus 8, 6 to 400, that'd be a little over 2 tons. But it had nice wheels. It had the steel wheels. First old Beam did when I was I don't know how old I was when Dad bought that Hardy. It was the best sprayer we ever had. It had rubber tires and a better motor you could start. The damn old Beam had an old sinker on it. He took 2 guys and a lot of wishful thinking to get it to run. One long.
Mr. Rich harvested from the 14 acres of his berrying orchard 7,140 boxes of apples, for which he received sufficient per box to net him clear of all expenses 75 cents per box. One tree on Mr. Rich's place, a Grimes Golden, bore sufficient fruit to pack out 45 boxes. This was in 1910. John Spainhauer was born in Iowa. His wife was born in Michigan. They lived in Arizona before coming to Fruitland in 1908. They purchased 20 acres on Fruitland Avenue. 8 acres of the 20 was improved and planted to apples. The original Spainhauer home is now the Treasure Valley Veterinary Center. H.J. Puchert moved his family from Nebraska to Idaho in 1910. He had 10 acres of land planted to 4-year-old trees of Jonathan, Rome Beauty, Arkansas Black, and Wine Sap variety. Mr. Puchert, like many of the growers that were improving young orchards, made a good thing trucking between the trees. He spent considerable time traveling, looking for a location before deciding on the Payette Valley and Fruitland. This is the McHenry residence on Lover's Lane. McHenry's had 20 acres of apples. When you see the early pictures of Fruitland with the long row of trees in the background, that is what the early residents referred to as Lover's Lane.
My earliest remembrance is coming back from Boise when I was 4 years old. See, my dad was appointed Commissioner of Agriculture from 1914 to 1918. And when I was born, I suppose that's who went up there because I can barely remember that. The reason I can remember it because I had a little red tricycle in the porch of the house we lived there in Boise was right around one side of the place out on Washington Street. Had 3 steps up to the porch into the house, and I used to ride that tricycle up and down. We'd loading up an old truck furniture to come home. Dad bought a 1918 Buick, and my brother Eugene got on my tricycle and rode it down the steps and broke it. And Dad took it and threw it in the garbage. And that really made my little heart bounce. I tell you, no more tricycle. But I can still remember coming down the Highway 30 from Boise in an open touring car thought that was wonderful.
Let's go back a ways. What brought your dad out here?
Well, Dad told me, I asked him how it when we come to Idaho. And he told me that the reason he came out originally is because his dad said Uncle Jess, that is his younger brother, was out in Idaho and found a place he wanted to buy, and he wanted his dad to send him his money. Grandpa evidently let the kids raise cows and hogs and feed them and take care of things, and he gave them a certain percent, and they put it away. He wouldn't give them the money, he saved it for them when he was kids. He said, Dad, you get on the train and go out and see what that boy's got. So Dad let him pay it and come out on the bench, he called it the Fruition bench. And I looked around, Uncle Jess was between here and New Plymouth, I know where his place was. And I went back to him, he said, yeah, he says, that's good country, I'm gonna go out there too.
Curtis Sargent first came to Idaho in 1901 from Kansas. He was married to Clara Eldridge. He became a permanent resident in 1904. He at once became impressed with the possibilities of fruit culture. He became part owner of the Red Apple Ranch, a 40-acre orchard with Mr. Burnett. Sargent almost exclusively managed and cared for the orchard. He was considered one of the acknowledged authorities on fruit growing, not only in the Payette Valley, but in the entire Northwest. He also was in partnership with Carnifex with the first Fruitland nursery. Fruitland State Bank was established February of 1910 with a capital stock of $10,000. All of the principal fruit growers of Fruitland and vicinity owned stock in this institution. Notice the first bank building has a water pump and a watering trough built in the front of the building. C.H. Sargent was the first president, E.E. Hunter vice president, and J.O. Scritchfield was cashier. The Hostetler family came to Fruitland in the fall of 1910 and purchased 11 acres of full-bearing orchards on Pennsylvania Avenue. 6 of these acres which had been cut back and top-grafted. In the fall of 1911, Hostetler and Son realized a net profit of $3,000 from the crop raised on the 5 acres of full-bearing orchard. The Meyer family came to Fruitland in 1911 and purchased 20 acres, 15 of which were in 3-year-old apple trees and 5 acres in pears. Their farm is on what was known then as Minnesota Avenue. In 1912, one of the finest homes in Fruitland was that of the M.R. Powell family. From a cabbage patch in October to a fine house in January, it contained 6 rooms and was strictly modern in every respect, having a bath and being heated with hot water and lighted by electricity, and a motor was being installed for pumping water. In 1911, the crop on a 20-acre orchard owned by Bowers and Hunter, 10 acres of which was in 7-year-old trees, was contracted to local parties at blossoming time for $4,680, and the parties buying the crop have records to show a net profit on the same of $2,000. The Flack family came to Fruitland in about 1903. He was said to be an enthusiastic booster of this area and one of the ones to have faith in the future and to aid in building up the city of Fruitland. He owned a fine modern 8-room house and considered that every acre of land he owned was worth $1,000 per acre. Between the rows of orchard trees, you will see corn and potatoes and other vegetable crops growing. They grew the crops there until the trees were so big that they shaded those areas. The J.N. Hill family on Riverside Avenue came to Fruitland in the spring of 1911, and that fall the 10 acres of orchard netted him $4,500.
In the picture of the next building, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different offices, and that was called the Universal Motor Company or the Thomas Building. And out in front of one is Grant Gardner, the druggist, and Jim McClure. Now this is an uncle of the Jim McClure that we're all acquainted with, and he was a mechanic. And then my dad was in the middle here, the pictures when you do look at them. And you'll notice these old pumps, and of course they had to have the tanks down underneath. And Hodge, what was his first name? When he bought the buildings from me, then he had to take out all the tanks in front. But they were there until probably in the 70s.
Frank Eldridge came to Idaho in 1903. After a few months working as a drayman in Boise, he came to Fruitland to work for his brother-in-law, Ed Sargent. He bought his first 10 acres in about 1909 and added the adjoining 10 acres the next year. In 1922, he bought the adjoining 20 acres from his father. His farm was south of Fruitland on Whitley Road. Frank Eldridge planted 5 acres of apples and later another 5. They picked their apples in bushel baskets and in boxes. One year they paid 5 cents a box to the pickers. Son Franklin Eldridge remembers when they pulled the orchards out, he and a cousin Byron Gardner sawed those pulled stumps with a 2-man cross-cut saw. The Fruitland apple dryer was located on the west side of the road going south out of Fruitland on Whitley Road. The apple dryer was about halfway to school from the Eldridge farm. The picture was taken in about 1916. Apple boxes were common, and in the early 30s they just were making the transition from boxes to baskets for picking apples. Franklin remembers riding on a hay wagon behind a team of horses to Payette to get a load of baskets for picking apples. The apples were transported to the packing house in those baskets, lidded, and the baskets were reused for packing and shipping to markets. Those boxes on the bottom left of the picture were the kind that were shipped in from the packing houses. The main pile of boxes have handles, and I think they were mostly for picking, although the shipping boxes were picked on also. Notice the 2 thin wooden pieces forming the bottom of the boxes held on to the much thicker end with 2 cleats. The box sides were about twice as thick as the bottom pieces. Franklin remembers these well because the partially broken boxes were his main source of wood for building things as a young boy. He even straightened the nails and used them. This is a scene in 1912 of the Payette River. It was the source of water supply for the Fruitland section. This beautiful mountain stream had its source in 2 magnificent lakes 200 miles away from Fruitland in the mountains. Its supply of water is unfailing, and there had never been, even in the driest season, any shortage of water in this famous section. Farmer's Ditch was the water supply for irrigation. It was owned and controlled by the farmers who annually elected their board of directors to manage its affairs. The cost of water in the Fruitland section was just the actual cost of the upkeep of the ditch. The sources supply the Payette River, having its source in 2 great lakes in the mountains. It was noted in 1911 a shortage of water in this section has never been experienced.
I was working a couple of jobs back in I'm pretty sure the late 40s. And we had bad weather, 48, 49 along and the county was out there, a Washoe Bridge going right there before the bridge, and trying to break up the ice lands, and Lochner and out of Fruitland, and I don't remember Johnson, Art Johnson out of Fruitland were running the county road and bridge, and they was afraid it's going to back up and take out that. So they were throwing dynamite out there, blasting a little bit. I got to throw dynamite a time or two. My dad talks about, this would have been 1905, 6, 7, along in there, that him and his brother were staying at that place up in Midvale, and sometimes they'd come to pay up. And he said, we've even gone to the dances and pay up, and it'd be maybe 12, 1 o'clock, you know, and so they'd go get the horse and buggy and turn him loose. And they'd sleep all the way to Midvale.
You can't do that in a car.
But he also said some guys would louse them up because they'd put a gate across they'd go out the ditch bank here and go to Weezer and then go up. But if they fenced off the ditch bank, that stopped him right there. He said that some morning we woke up and the horse was standing there just in front of the gate.
Shoot.
Because they, you know, when you need pasture for your cattle, you're going to take advantage of a weed patch. Back to that picture, let them onto the ditch bank, my brother.
This one?
Yeah. That's my dad and brother, Bob, out in the field. I took the picture.
So what are they doing here?
The horses go round and round in a circle on this long timber. They just go in a complete circle. And this drum right here, right there, it winds the cable, pulls the cable. Every time they go around, it puts a lap on the drum of this thing. And it's anchored down low on a tree. And they cut the limbs off up about 4 or 5 feet, and you put the cable over the top of those limbs. By being anchored on the ground, it just tips the tree out, and then they keep winding and drag it out to where you can.
That's how they removed the trees.
You just go down 2 rows, and this sled that is on was all mobile. Of course, 2 horses could just move to where they wanted. And they just wind that up. And they didn't have the big machinery that they got now. They just reach out and pick it up.
Well, we kind of strayed away.
$10.
You know, the last time you asked me about Gustav's. And that's when the railroad went through here. Then all of this country was wide open. And he had been a miller in Faribault. That's where my dad was born. And he had heard somebody wanted a miller in Payette. So he got on the train and come down, looked it over, and they hired him. So he went to work, and then he sent for the family to come later on the train. But then the mill burned down, and he had to resort to his carpentry, you know, work there. And then he heard about this land opening up, and he went up to try to get a homestead. But all of the ones that were under the irrigation
Already?
were already taken. Well, he didn't want to go out and homestead a piece of sagebrush. So he got talking to Pathel, and Pathel says, well, if you want to come out here, I'll sell you 40 acres of money. So I think Granddad paid him $1,000 for that 40 acres. And that's the way a lot of them, that's the way a lot of them did. They homesteaded and then they sold off 40 acres to different people, you know, and that's the way they made their money.
One of her
The original 40 acres was in alfalfa in 1908, but J.D. planted 11 acres of the farm into Jonathan, Rome's, and Winesap apples in 1909. This was the original Shake family orchard. Another 12 acres of the original 40-acre farm was planted into Delicious apples in 1912. J.D. Shake and his three sons Homer, Harold, and Rodney spent much of their summers living in tents and working on the original Fruitland Ranch. Hudson's first recollections of the orchards was from the driver's seat of a two-horse sprayer with a wooden tank and a gas engine pump, as Rodney and another man applied an early spring dormant spray of lime and sulfur to the apple trees. The old tank held 200 gallons and had to be driven about a mile each way to be filled at the neighbor's pump. The farm horses were well trained to move up and down the tree rows, one tree at a time upon command, but Bud really thought he had command of those big horses. This driver's job was great until an errant breeze wafted some of the cold, clammy, and smelly lime sulfur spray down Bud's head, ears, and down the back of his neck. He did very much enjoy the many round trips to fill the water tank as he became familiar with the surrounding area. Hudson joined his father Rodney in his fruit business in 1945 after being discharged from the Air Force. He worked as a full partner with Rodney until Rodney's death in 1966.
But Granddad, when he bought this 40 acres, and they talked about planting fruit trees. Okay, so he bought 11 acres at the back of the place, enough trees for that. And then they were only planted on a 48 to the acre, 30 feet on the square. So when they grew up, they're pretty big trees. And they didn't put they were just putting the ditch in when he come out here, but it didn't have the water here yet. See, the main one came from Emmett, you know, and ended up right here at Palisades Corner. And our ditch is called the West Side Lateral, which comes off of the main ditch right there. We're the second one on the ditch here. But he didn't have that. So he planted those trees on that 11 acres and got a wagon and these two horses and the barrels. And he went down to the spring down below it. I don't know, do you know that there's a spring
Down below the road that goes down.
I remember that.
Well, yeah, you can tell in the spring it's something, it's always green. And there's a lot of watercress and stuff.
There's a strata
that comes out
through here from Payette River to the Snake River. But it's up above, it's about 20 or 30 feet up above the Snake. So it's just last spring. Well, that's where we have our well. Our water comes right from that 40-foot.
Oh, really?
It's only 40 foot. I feel fortunate that it's lasted this long now with all the other wells that are around here.
Right.
So anyway, well, when I moved out he'd go down there and fill up. We had a big freeze in '48.
Oh, yeah.
And see, those trees were 40 years old then. 1908,
I can remember they were still there when we came out here.
And the next spring they didn't leaf out. in him.
Oh,
Killed him dead.
Deader than doing
really?
it. Well, they should have been gone before that.
Oh yeah, they had trunks almost as big as this table.
Why? It's pretty big.
So anyway, a guy that worked for Dad and myself, we spent all of 48 cutting down that 11 acres of those old trees. And we couldn't cut off the limbs, you know, first. And then the stumps were so big that we had to drill holes in the top of them and put black powder in and blow them out, because we couldn't handle with our little tractor, couldn't even get them. Well, we finally, and we pulled all of those up over the hill and down next to that spring.
Oh, yeah?
There was a big canyon where the spring water had cut through there. So we put all of those
Where the freeway is now.
down in there. And if you want to see some apples growing, they're growing there right now.
Is that right?
That's like a
Here is Hudson Shake and his three sons, James, Terry, and Steve, in the orchard that had to be moved to make room for the freeway. They moved 500 trees and only lost 2. Here are Tony Hingler, Sam Ranelli, and Hudson Shake with their awards for their display of the Payette Valley grown fruit at the Pacific International in Portland, Oregon. From August 1st to November 1st, 1940, the Kinnaman packing house on the Kinnaman farm at Fruitland was used as a mattress making center. 375 families of Payette County made 565 cotton mattresses during the summer of 1940, under the supervision of the Payette County Extension Service and the County Agricultural Conservation Association. The Kinnaman packing house at Fruitland was rented for $15 per month, and the box factory in Payette for $30 per month, including insurance. A county-wide committee was organized to contact applicants, arrange work schedules, and select center supervisors. The Fruitland Center was supervised by Mrs. R.T. Epperson. Mrs. R.F. Sparkman supervised the Payette Center at the box factory, with Mrs. Elaine Lochner and Mrs. R.F. Loveland part-time supervisors. Supervisors were paid $2.40 per day for their services. 380 mattresses were made at Fruitland, and 245 mattresses were made at the Payette Center. Individuals made their own mattresses and were charged $1.55 per mattress. In some cases of illness, neighbors completed mattresses for them. Hugh Holman remembers as a child helping to make the mattresses at the Kinnaman shed. He says the ticking was white with blue stripes. They had to lay the cotton out just right so as not to have lumps in the mattress. The string used to tie the mattress was yellow. Because of the cost, their family was unable to make a mattress for each member of the family, but they did make 3 or 4. 50 pounds of cotton and 10 yards of ticking were provided free for each mattress. The picture shows the bales of cotton on the deck of the packing house. It was noted they had excellent cross ventilation so that no sickness was caused from dust. There was ample room to sun the cotton. The records from this project are fascinating. It is an excellent example of what the Extension Service is all about. County working with other counties and neighbors working with neighbors. Charles Hingler moved his family from Missouri to Utah in 1903. He had purchased a ranch, primarily a livestock operation near Salt Lake City. It included some farmland and a small orchard. In 1908, Charles' eldest son, C.B. Hingler, purchased a farm about 1½ miles south of Fruitland, Idaho. He began growing fruit trees on his farm and became the first member of the Hingler family to become an orchardist. In 1909, Charles Hingler sold his properties in Utah and bought a farm across from his son Charles' farm near Fruitland. This farm had formerly been a nursery and had several acres of fruit on it. In 1927, C.B. Hingler became a partner in the Palumbo Arata Fruit Company, and a packing plant was built in Fruitland on the railroad siding. Hingler Packing Company was organized in 1943. It consisted of 3 equal partners, Tony and Joe Hingler and J.A. McMillan. McMillan owned 3 packing plants located at Payette, Feltham, and Buckingham. By 1938, Mr. McMillan had closed all 3 packing plants. There was a lack of producing orchards due to their removal because of the hard times. The packing plant at Buckingham, located 1½ miles southeast of Fruitland, became part of Hingler Packing Company and the packing location. As of the present year, 2010, it remains the site of the Hingler Packing Company. In 1951, cartons were first used for shipping apples rather than the bushel baskets that had been used up to this time. In 1956, cartons were used for some of the prunes rather than the 1/2 bushel baskets that had always been used before. Is it taking? Okay. This is quite something. Are these prunes? Or apples? Apples? Huh.
You can butt about everything though.
What?
You can butt about almost about anything.
Is that right? Huh. So, does this change the what the tree can produce then?
Yeah.
And we've been watching these little trees, and this is pretty neat.
Now what are you grafting on there? Oh, Fuji?
Yeah.
And what are these here?
That's the rootstock. Those, not even a kind of, it's like a...
Rome or...
No, I don't taste any kind of apple. They don't have any taste.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. They use it only for the roots.
Well, for the roots. And after that gets started, they'll cut them off?
They cut one here and they start growing the other one.
Well, that's neat. I've always heard about it, but I haven't. Oh, my back hurts just watching you guys.
This is kind of like planting potatoes when you have to cut the potatoes so there's an eye in each hill. Yeah. You're just putting a bud off of it. I'm going to watch you real close when you cut that off now. And then you wrap the Is that sticky or just a piece of cellophane or something?
No, it's just regular tape.
It's what?
That's it. It's just regular tape.
Oh, I guess. Huh.
Regular plastic.
Just regular tape. Huh. So they really don't go out and plant a Fuji tree then, huh?
No.
They just plant a generic tree and make whatever they want out of it.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Did you start over there?
No, we started on
Oh,
that
there.
side.
Oh.
Only the ones with tapes like this, though.
Oh,
The
okay.
black ones were this was cheaper to buy, like to bud it, than to actually buy it already budded.
So you don't call it grafting, you call it budding.
Well, I call it budding.
You call it budding. What do other people call it?
We call it grafting. Spanish is called bando.
Oh!
I grew up calling it like that. I just call it budding.
This is budding, and the grafting is for the bigger. With the grafting and the bigger orchards, it's a different kind of work.
Yes. So if you were working in larger trees, you would call it grafting. Well, that makes sense.
We're just putting one bud on the tree.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. I'm glad you told me in English, though, because it wouldn't make sense in Spanish. Well, this is really interesting. Thank you so much. So how many of these can you do in a day? Or an hour?
An hour.
300 an hour, 3,000 a day.
Oh, that's a lot of apples. Thank you.
remember when Scoop is about the same age as my brother Eugene. And Dutch would have been Bill's age, and Aubrey is probably Guy's age, about that area anyhow. I can remember when I went to Terry, be real interesting to you. They had BB guns, the old lever action BB guns, each one of the kids. And Dad just stooped over out there doing something, and Dutch shot him in the butt with a BB. And Dutch said in later years, I never knew your dad could move so fast. We roared up there, caught him and turned him over and blistered his butt. Now it's unusual for a man to paddle another man's kids.
Yeah.
Not in those days. He done him.
Oh,
I can
gosh.
remember my mouth open, I was just a little kid. And I knew better than that.
Yeah.
Sometime about 1932, Vernon and Florence Swartwood moved to Fruitland from Weiser. They had originally come from Kansas. Vernon was a butcher and came west to supply wild game to the mines. During the Depression, Vernon Swartwood ran the Fruitland Cash Market near the east end of Main Street on the south side of the street. Claire Williams Inglehorn remembers the Fruitland Cash Market. Mrs. Swartwood was a very caring person. Claire says during the Depression of the 40s, bananas and nylon stockings were quite hard to get. Mrs. Swartwood always saw that young mothers with little kids would get the bananas.
Your name? I'm Ken Willard. My mother wrote the poem. She's 88 years old. She's a native Idahoan, a transplant in Missouri. The Homesteaders, written by Eunice Willard. From Arkansas, Missouri, and the Midwest they came to settle along the Snake River Plain. Here the soil was rich, the sage grew tall. To these homesteaders, this land seemed to beckon and call. They didn't mind work, the back-breaking toil. They built dams to water the soil, clearing off sage from blowing sand. With horse-drawn plows, they tilled the land, building canals and shoveling ditches to water the crops. From daylight to dark, they worked until they dropped. Often their lives seemed dismal and gray, but they looked forward in hope to a far better day. Their struggles were many. How on earth did they cope? Rabbits and grasshoppers with dust storms aplenty, enough to lose hope. Also in content, both sheepmen and cattle barons regarded them as strange, those damnable nesters, hell-bent on destroying the range. With time, the plains became beautiful farms, nice homes with pastures, corrals, and barns. Tall shade trees and orchards, too. Plentiful were the crops they grew. Now, as we travel through the Snake River Plains, we view the green fields and the beauty they bring. Yet, I often think of the people of those long ago years who created all this with their toil, their sweat, and sometimes, yes, sometimes with their tears.